Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Moloney. I work at BluePrism. I am the Director of Strategy for our advisory partners. So it is a lot of fun to talk to Bain, McKinsey, and other boutique advisories all the time. But my job really is only partly focused on them. I'm mostly focused on what BluePrism can do in the realm of the future of work, art of the possible, taking the ideas that we gain from advisories and share with them and intersperse that with our larger partner ecosystem and our field sales. And so on that journey of learning about the potential of automation in the future of work, I've come up with this presentation, and it's been fed by many sources. And one of the wells I've gone to is actually Shibumi, because your organization is unique with its deep background in business process management, taking the ideas intrinsic to process management and externalizing them for automation planning, monitoring, and process generation has really helped the automation journey for not only your customers but your partners as well, like BluePrism. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm just really going to go through, instead of a brief history of time, just the brief history of the Industrial Revolution. So it's almost as large in scope. So to get started, people may have seen slides like this before. I'm not going to dwell on a lot of the detail, but I want you to think of each of the industrial revolutions we've lived through as each providing a key benefit. And each industrial revolution feeds into the following industrial revolution. So the first industrial revolution, which started a couple hundred years ago, was really harnessing energy other than muscle to do work. It just transformed how we could go to market with goods. Rather than being the muscle of a laborer or of a beast of burden, you could finally get steam and water and eventually electricity interwoven with human labor to produce things larger and more efficiently and at scale than could previously be done. The second industrial revolution used those new forms of energy but put them into a distributed model. It had infrastructure. So now you could take those autonomous vehicles that you could power with petrol and put them on roads, or steam engines on rails for trains, and it fed into all the infrastructure for the communications revolutions of telegraph and then later telephone and radio and then television. So now you had an infrastructure or a grid in which to carry out business. The third industrial revolution is really about data. It's intelligence that you gain from understanding that what you do is based on what you know. And the data revolution is really in the lifespan of many of you in the audience. It really was something that came in with the central processor, and now you could take information and make it on demand. You would never forget anything. You'd be able to always know everything about your customer or the services you provided to your customer or to your supply chain. And really the revolution that we still live in today with the importance of data, we haven't fully defined that. It's such an amorphous topic. It led to the fourth industrial revolution, which is really the idea of artificial intelligence. And everything on the Internet of Things needs you to have an algorithmic way of looking at the world, because the Internet is made up of billions and soon to be hundreds of billions of objects. And it's growing exponentially every decade. So how do you keep track of all those things? How do you keep track of who needs them, who's using them, how are they maintained, how are they retired? You need intelligent automation for all of those activities and behaviors. And then finally, I'm really a champion of a new idea, which is we're looking at the fifth industrial revolution. And that is really the idea that, as I said earlier, every revolution builds on its predecessors. What we're looking at now is this concept of autonomous automation. How do you have devices that can work on-grid or off-grid, working with people or autonomous of people, working with an Internet of Things or working with massive data sets, and calling information that's just in time or real time with a need. You can no longer do that with humans manipulating the data or calling the data. You have to have autonomous automation if you're going to have autonomous cars, if you're going to have symmetric and asymmetric forms of communication. So we're reaching a point where all of these things are playing together. And I think if you look at this graph from McKinsey, you can kind of see that from the first industrial revolution to present, we've seen an acceleration of adoption of technologies. So I was born modest, 57 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to be in the midst of the second industrial revolution. And before I was born, it took roughly 40 to 75 years for technologies to be adopted. And since I've been around, the average adoption time has dropped to usually less than a decade, where most of the population enjoys the benefits of the emerging technologies. And as I said before, the infrastructure is first generation, laying down communications and logistics for travel and transport. But then there's a reuse. You can start seeing that you take a radio tower, turn it into a TV tower. Based on those towers, you've also got the grid to put out cell towers. So now you have more and more technologies parlaying on the previous ones, adding layers of complexity, of value, but complexity. So how do you manage all of that? You're going to need more and more automation. And when we start thinking about the future, where we're going with the future of work, as I said earlier, how do you do things in real time? How do you plan for automation as part of the design? And that's really where the industry is going to be going. We're going to have to hope that we figure out not only how we would have things like space stations, which was the old idea of the future, but much more mundane things thanks to COVID-19. How are we going to be able to have resilient supply chains? How are we going to be able to have local manufacture of things like PPE? How are we going to be able to make sure we have a secure food supply regionally? Well, when you start thinking about everything we talked about in the Industrial Revolutions, they're culminating in this set of solutions. And that brings me back to why it's important to think about the Industrial Revolution as all the things that we talked about now accelerating in their planning and adoption, which requires more intelligent automation to deal with all of the disruptive technologies which are now commonplace. This particular slide is not even a decade old from McKinsey, and it was talking about the areas of disruptive technologies that would impact life. Rather than lead to a deeper discussion of any one of these technologies, just understand that there's a common thread if you want to talk about the transformation of energy or the transformation of manufacturing or the transformation of any of these technologies. You need automation of knowledge. You need knowledge workers. You need the ability to plan for the deployment of these technologies. And this is, again, where Shibumi is playing a pivotal role, because without having this idea of how we're going to build it, you're never going to achieve it. You need to understand the ideas of building into a solution, its resiliency, its business value, its reuse, the metrics for success. And if you can distill that into the plan, you're more likely to hit the outcome you're expecting, that and the business value you're shooting for. The other thing is you're starting to see a transformation in the skill sets people are going to have, because as you understand that autonomous automation is going to introduce digital workers and AI services into the workplace, you're going to see that people are as critical to work as ever. People are still going to have jobs. They're just going to have drastically different jobs requiring a focus on different skills. I'd like you to think about the slide before I have the reveal on it. And these are two views of the future of accounting functions within business. One is a view from Ernst & Young and the other is a view from Robert Half. And they're looking at the future of finance and accounting in every organization. And these are the skills, these are the values they think that people are going to have to run those organizations in the future, the near future. What's missing is none of these views of the great skills that you're going to have in finance and accounting are accounting. You might notice there's no CPA in this model. They just need people who can understand the reports generated by a digital worker, who's going to be updated in its understanding of tax code once a year and carry out all of the complex, mundane, usually human error prone math to do your finance and accounting. You're going to have optical character recognition, scanning invoices and paying, making payments and processing discounts and generating your tax reports. People won't be doing that, but they will have to read the reports, look for new terms for payments and credits. They're going to become better at negotiating, better at building new relationships, better at building out new services, and hopefully more a pipeline for the services that they sell in their organization. So you're seeing that it's a drastically different world. We've already started entering into this world. Those skill sets are changing with the introduction of digital workers. And as I said, the elephant in the room is, well, what happens to my job? And as I said, if your job is on the very simple, mundane complex workflows, you're in trouble because those are the jobs that are easily automated by digital workers. These are the jobs that are usually easy for your business analyst and your advisory consultants to focus on for efficiency. What you need to do is have jobs that have a more strategic, customer experience focused, collaboration basis in what they do day in, day out, making content of value. These are the jobs that digital workers can facilitate, but digital workers themselves are not going to carry out. In the future, I look at work as a three-legged stool of people, digital workers, and AI services. And there'll be combinations where sometimes digital workers will master and manage other digital workers. There'll be times where AI services, which are often expensive and complicated, will be culled and reported through digital workers for people to consume. I see people wanting to collaborate, but they're not going to handle every facet of that collaboration. They're going to defer back to digital workers as note takers or as meeting schedulers. So you're just looking at a whole new set of understanding, and that's why we not only BluePrism partner with Shibumi for the business view and the business strategy, the business planning for automation, but other new partners like Fathom, which help customers look at their skill sets in HR, their future work requirements for their workers and their future digital workers, because it is a holistic plan. It is part of digital transformation. All of these things are interwoven. I'm not going to read at length any of these topics. I'm just going to quickly cross by them so you can have an idea of the scope of this is impacting every aspect of how organizations work and, in a sense, organize themselves. So starting with where we're looking at the automation revolution, the majority of companies have already experimented with some aspects of automation. We're starting to see that those companies that do put more of a focus on the investment from a project perspective, from a transformation perspective, are usually much more successful. So the process here is going to be very familiar to you at Shibumi, because this very much looks like well planned out project management, and that's your strong suit. But more and more of the customers you have cross industry are becoming familiar with the language. They're realizing what it's going to take for them to have a more diversified labor force. They're looking conceptually at digital workers as a new resource pool that'll allow them to do work just like you with nearshore or offshore consultants. So as the automation revolution is adopted in financial services and other industries, you're going to see that the skills and activities will be more prescribed. There'll be more in the project plans, and they will be part of the criteria for success outcome for digital transformation. I mentioned earlier the Internet of Things. I won't read from this this diagram other than to let you see that this was projected that there would be 200 billion objects in the Internet of Things connected directly or indirectly to the Internet, semi-autonomous devices, by 2020. Well, that was about half right. There's closer to 500 million objects already connected to the Internet. We're not even quite done with 2020. So the acceleration of needing to have a handle on not only what people will use in a simple enterprise, but what they're going to use in the public sector for managing cities. You're going to have smart cities that are going to be able to manage their infrastructure, manage their public health. COVID-19 has made this critically important. You have to have the ability to correlate between different organizations to look at the impact of sanitation on public health or on food supply or other things we mentioned earlier. So the only way you can do this at scale is with automation practices. In the Internet of Things, you can't deliver things commercially without having an operational plan. Many business cases were thought of in the last 30 or 40 years, especially since the third industrial revolution of data, but they weren't financially feasible. The operational costs weren't available at scale. It required too many people doing too many help desk functions to help too many customers maintain the viability of some of the solutions that you could bring to market. Those limitations are being removed thanks to intelligent automation. if you can autonomously manage, not just with a chatbot that helps you with a simple FAQ, but really have deep intelligence on your customer's use of a product or service, and not simply troubleshoot it, but heighten the user experience. Use the self-healing of a network that AI can provide to present new solutions to a customer, maintain the customer satisfaction and loyalty. You can now build use cases where historically, you would hit limitations or borders. And if you start looking at what people expect in the workplace, people are really expecting that they're going to rely more and more on the digital workers to pick up the slack. When it comes to risk and security, you can't expect people to do most of the heavy lifting to make sure the enterprise is secure. People admit to breaking policies, finding shortcuts, getting the work done that they need to do. They need a healthy, intelligent, well-trained co-worker, a digital worker, to keep eyes on the corporate risk, the overcoming the conundrum of, the disconnect between what people are supposed to do and what they do in their actual workflow daily or weekly. And that's where you're going to see that the acceptance of digital workers is going to liberate people from some of these shortcomings, from some of these risks that they have introduced into their own workspace. So digital workers will really help transform to make an environment much more secure. Here, in the current state, Microsoft did an interesting study of an attack where a hacker gained access to data structures within an organization. When they did that, it took well over 2 months before the attack was even detected. And the normal avenue for getting access to a system is usually through social networking or some other usurpation of rights that a human worker would have. If you start putting into the mix digital workers who can now run real-time defense against hacker attacks, real-time or near real-time identification of compromises, you can now protect an organization in a sense in a proactive way rather than the reactive way. And again, the more you protect the company assets, the more liability, the less litigation, the more resources available to do the business of the business. So we sometimes think of digital workers as all future and 21st century, but remember, especially RPA systems like BluePrism and our competitors, robotic process automation started to deal with legacy systems. How do you swivel chair between legacy screens and learn how to work across them more efficiently? Well, that's still important because that logic keeps following through not only to legacy systems, but new forms of communication and collaboration. You're seeing that people now, as I said earlier, are going to expect their digital workers to be a member of the team. They will be note takers. They're going to ensure that the policies and protocols are adhered to when people work together. All the prep work for a meeting before people can actually shake a hand with each other post-COVID-19. You're going to have the digital worker doing the scheduling, doing the research, providing this information, allowing people to have a more rich experience. They're also going to make sure that biases and other policies of equality can be ensured, because wherever they're part of an activity, you'll make sure that there are policies to protect people from bias or access rooted out of legacy procedures in a company. So it's really an interesting world of what the future of work is going to allow as far as empowerment and extendability. Humanizing a human experience, ironically, is going to be something that the digital worker is going to play a role in, because as it takes on more of these important functions for audit and compliance and corporate policies, when people learn to work with the digital workers, they're learning to adhere to the corporate policies that are designed to be inclusive and to protect the workers and their customers and their partners. So it really will just streamline the process. Talking about streamlining the humanization of work, it is complicated to look at cognitive services, automation services, insights that you have from existing applications. Humans, it's a dizzying experience. But for a digital worker, that's what they're built for. That's exactly, they have no problem looking at one thing or n number of things concurrently. If they can be the conduit for integrating complex new services like machine learning, That will allow people to focus more on the human aspect, on the intuitive, on the relational aspect of their job. If they can co-work with a digital worker, it'll allow them to expand and enrich the kind of work that they do. So skills development, as I mentioned earlier, just understand that we're woefully inadequate today in planning for the skills of tomorrow. We are seeing a lot of thought, as I mentioned earlier with Fathom, on retraining people, defining the work of tomorrow, to hire the right people. It really is something where it's revenge of the nerds. I myself have a doctorate in history. I'm in the right place at the right time. I learned to ingest a lot of information, articulate it relatively well, and be able to look for patterns. Those are the skills of tomorrow. So I'm very lucky that I could not have planned for this about 30 years ago when I got my doctorate. When you start looking at the skills today, we need people who are deep in understanding math, deep in communication skills, deep in team building. And these are the skills that you can augment, as I said earlier, with a digital worker. But the digital worker is not really built to carry out those functions. It's a non-threatening, it's a symbiotic relationship between digital workers and people. And opportunistically, you can have the AI services facilitate these types of interactions and the outcomes for this type of collaboration. A quick idea, I'm starting to wrap up now, a quick idea is if you start thinking about the innovation curve, it's very difficult to have non-production instances where people can play and learn and test out a proof of value. With a digital worker, that bar is lowered considerably. They can set up test environments. They can cull data and sanitize it for some testing or some non-production views. They can help you render prototypes in near real time at virtually no cost, because they're just going to take variations of production instances and bring them back to you over and over and over again. You can fail early and fail often, and a digital worker is in a sense just asking you to reset, and it'll enable people to do things on a scale of innovation they haven't been able to do before. A novel idea, and this actually is something that most people haven't appreciated yet, is digital workers are going to help smooth the relationships cross-generationally between people who, for the first time in probably human history, we're spanning 3, sometimes 4 generations of people in the workplace at the same time. And these people, because of the education they had, the cultural mores of where they grew up, and the technologies that were available as they entered the workforce, have different preferences. Some prefer longhand articles. Some prefer very simple asymmetric communication like email or a text. Some like real-time communications with voice. Well, how do you normalize that type of interaction, that type of collaboration among people from different generations and different backgrounds? You can do that with a digital worker. If you allow a digital worker to use a natural language processing or other AI service, they can not only help people communicate across different channels like email or text or voice, they can do real-time translation. So somebody working in German can have real-time collaboration with someone who's a native English speaker or Japanese or whatever language the global team works with. And the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, as far as the understanding of the roles, a digital worker is also going to be something of a scribe, because now people will know that as long as they had a digital worker in the conversation, they can always reproduce or trace or report on the nature of the conversation, which will help with risk and compliance and also people's own productivity, because they can fetch information from a simple query of a digital worker where they're not sure exactly when and where that conversation took place. The digital worker will never forget. So when we start talking about improving performance, we're not talking about the old metrics, the old ways. Shibumi is very powerful at helping companies define their new metrics, to put things into the new order of things. So you won't get penalized, like Dilbert, for coming up with ways of incrementally increasing productivity. The new norm is, how do you raise the tide for all boats? How do you improve the upskilling of not just the individual worker, but of the organization as a whole, of the technology support organization, as I mentioned earlier with the collaboration, the communications organization. We're going through a massive upskilling. And now you'd have to have, for every project, metrics against the current order and the future order, the current state and the future state. And I think that planning is something that most organizations are not adequately prepared to deliver on, and that's another reason that they're turning to vendors like Shibumi. they'll also benefit from having a longer tail. What I mean by that is the more that you can automate the types of tasks I have listed here, the easier it is for people to go on to higher value activities. So the more you continuously train your digital workers, they will not only carry out those new functions, but in the background, they will take those new metrics and apply them to all the work they've previously done. So if there's a new regulatory requirement or a new assessment of opportunity, digital workers can continuously go back over any body of work and always bring it up to date. And that liberates people to not worry about backward-facing risk and compliance or backward-facing issues of support. They'll leave that for the digital workers. I mentioned a process improvement in performance. It will matter, but it's going to matter more in the terms of tomorrow's metrics. And that will be things about how many collaboration environments have you created? How much have you been able to innovate and presenting new products to market? It's not going to be how many pieces of paper you processed today and how many invoices were paid. And if you really just want an idea of the new metrics, think about it among yourselves. How many of you have been looking for jobs, finding jobs, using the thread of services on the bottom or on the top? When's the last time you had to hand deliver a resume? When's the last time you went to a job fair? When's the last time that you had to print out and forward or send a PDF of your resume rather than have it provided through LinkedIn or another electronic format? Often, even with COVID, it's more important now, video as an early round of interviewing. The background research that is happening in social media for a candidate even before they're introduced to a company. So this transformation is already taking place, and digital workers are going to have a larger role in helping understand what the future of work is going to be made up of, both on their part and the human part and the AI part. And then the final thing here is, if you want to look at the importance of growth, it really is retention. It is retention of employees, it's retention of your customers, it's retention of your partners. It just has to be all part of the holistic view of the future, of the work of tomorrow. And if you can plan ahead, and especially now with the challenges of COVID-19, it mitigates some of the rough aspects of distance learning, distance collaboration, some of the aspects of creating virtual teams, some of the aspects of normalizing go-to-markets. You can look at digital workers as a normalizing effect for all of these things. And the people who are entering the workforce now out of college are so used to working with technology, they are expecting them to be seamlessly and easily adopted. There's no longer this gatekeeper approach to technology. So just to summarize, I bring up this slide because I was asked to speak with Intel about less than a year ago, and they were asking me about the future of work. And the irony is I found out that they actually had published this little graphic on it about a decade ago, and they weren't even aware of it. But it really hasn't changed much in that decade. How are you going to really allow for people to interact with electronic resources as an extension of the old models, the old activities that they had, and have consistency and be able to innovate and not be left behind? And really, if you can overcome that approach, you're going to understand the future of work. So my last slide here is to show you that the future of work is a nexus of technology, the simple business mission, the people that make it up, and where they are in the marketplace, how they want to present themselves. And that could be quite virtual, quite physical. If you understand that these are all aspects of culture and defining culture, you're ready for digital transformation, because this is the future of work framework that was produced by NASA. And this is actually the way that they've been defining themselves for the last 5 years. They really look at technology as an aspect of culture. And I think that's the last message I want everyone here to understand, especially with Shibumi. You don't lose sight of what's most important, which is the business process for the business value. You're helping people, as I said earlier, define the metrics, helping them keep those metrics true to whatever automation project they're carrying out. They're allowing for that reuse so they can get more projects in that portfolio of applications or in that business division to be consistent. And that will allow for easier adoption by the people for the transformation of that organization. It'll allow them to be true to their mission, and it'll help them have a better center on how it's delivered and how they're presented to the marketplace. So I want to thank you for your time. I hope I didn't run on too long. I am available for any follow-ups. You can contact me directly or through Ken Pellegrino. And I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you today. So thank you very much and be well.